Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to have you all here. Thank you again for your patience. Thank you to Dennis and Annalise for that amazing dialogue to open up the day. We really appreciate you setting the tone for our intentions for this weekend. We are so excited to welcome Mark Lakeman into the space. He is going to be speaking on the topic of radical cultivation, seize your destiny. All right, Mark is the founder of City Repair and Communitecture, Architecture and Permaculture Planning. Mark, thank you so much for being in the space today. It's an honor to have you here, and I'm gonna let you take the floor now.
All right, thanks, Genevieve.
Thank you.
Well, it's wonderful to be here with everyone, and I feel you, even though I can't see you, and I look forward to interacting with you at some point in the future and hearing more about your stories as well. So I want to just touch on the subject of the gathering today. Radical cultivation to seize your destiny is to support the overall notion of ripples of change. I want to point out that ripples can become waves, and I'll be talking more about wave-sized ripples today, sometimes becoming quite large and sweeping. Okay, well, so I wanted to just touch on the theme of the gathering related to symbiosis, the idea of ripples of change. And I'm very inspired by that because we've been using that as a metaphor. But frankly, I want to talk about waves today, ripples becoming waves. And I don't want to think of this in a destructive sense, although I do sometimes use the metaphor of the tsunami. Radical cultivation, the title of my talk today, the idea of seizing your destiny. It's I'm partially talking about urban agriculture when I'm partially referring to urban agriculture when I assign that title, but really I'm talking about seizing your own destiny and growing yourself. To cultivate you in your greatest capacity, to cultivate yourself, to grow into your highest, strongest self is really what I'm talking about today. So that means inherently yourself individually, but also seeing yourself as a larger whole, in which the scales and scales of the self that you identify with expand beyond your immediate community, your immediate family, the neighborhood or culture where you find yourself, what you identify with, and to go global in that scale if you can, and beyond, which of course applies to the work that Dennis, McKenna, and his allies and affiliates have been championing for the longest time, and with such great benefit. So I think it's essential not just to have an epiphany, but also have a framework for action, and also to have tools to employ to affect change. So I'll be showing you just endless examples of that today, and we certainly won't get through all the images and stories that I have. I only have selected a few, but I'm literally surrounded by thousands of self-organizing cultures in the city of Portland. And because Portland's been in the news so much lately, I just want to emphasize for those of you who don't know, this place is a spectacular shining jewel of the highest rate of community participation in all dimensions of the city, with the most effective and radical, grounded city council that's about to become even more spectacular in just a few days. So we are in the cultures of, in the urban cultures of cities in North America, we certainly have a highly motivated population that is revolutionizing absolutely everything about this place. And many of us know that the eyes of the world are upon us. People come here from all over the place. This time of year, I'm normally in my own home. I'm housing almost 20 Japanese people who come just to sit in my garden and have dialogues. Very international culture connected to people from all over the place. And then I could just go on and on about that. But the success of this place is very much about the idea of being relational and creating networks. And that, after all, is an ecological design principle that we discuss very frequently in the field of permaculture, education and action. But around tools to go from your epiphany to sort of seeing the context, not just of the luminous, inherent like life force that you can discover is actually imbued in everything around you, but to then see the framework of our kind of design context. How can we engage these oppressive dominator systems, for instance? This is a way that a lot of people, some terminology, a lot of people have acquired to be able to start to see that we are in a colonial framework that's been powerfully, violently imposed upon not just, not just through westward expansion, as you might have learned about in high school, across North America, but really the whole of the Western Hemisphere, except the pockets of culture that persist with their own patterns. But really in so many other circumstances in the world, where an invasive culture comes along to violently supplant the sovereign cultures that have persisted there for the longest time, and then impose kind of exactly the same set of patterns, but really inverse reflections. So every culture has an economy, and every culture has a set of land-based patterns, pathways, places, ways that people, are housed, and things that they do to meet their needs. Except within the cultures of colonialism, the gathering places are removed. You live in long, straight, flat lines. The world is conceived of as a commodity. Instead of having an integrated set of patterns where you live and work with the same group of people and you become stronger every day, within the cultures where we persist in colonialism, because of zoning, for instance, you have to leave where you live every day to go elsewhere to make money among people you don't tend to get to know. And you come back at the end of the day to live among people you don't tend to get to know. And that simple disintegration of the essential functions of living and working that are so integral in a village, by separating them, you defeat the ability to create, place-based, indomitable, persistent, creative patterns. So it's important to have a framework to see what's going on and why we're experiencing so many dystopic outcomes that are really antithetical systems. And I'm not going to talk too much more about that context. I do want to say that in our case, inspired very much by a variety of different teachers that we've been lucky to be informed by, including, in my own case, a Cheyenne architect, and various immersions, especially in a Mayan context where I spent a lot of time visiting Lakeman people. I'm working with people that are also similarly informed and have been fortunate enough to travel. And a lot of people that didn't need to travel because they listened to their grandmothers and, fell in love with the world. So, the movements that I'm part of, urban repair, city repair, community architecture, urban permaculture, we're propelled toward kind of growing into a larger sense of self with each other and really identifying with each other. And before I go farther, I just want to say, people sometimes ask me, like, what do you love the most about permaculture? And it's the culture. I've never been able to find people who are so open and receptive to each other, affirm each other, and celebrate each other as I have in permaculture. So I think I've found my people in this place of activism, design activism, I like to call it. So I just want to say, I think that colonialism stacks dysfunction intentionally. It creates dysfunctional systems at the same time as it disempowers people. It rearranges patterns and systems in order to exhaust people and extract from them. After all, I think it is true, and you can find this definition in the Common History book, that the definition of colonialism and the colonial city-state is the specialization and compartmentalization of people, so that they're separated. They don't really understand the whole system. They don't really understand how they each relate. And then they're individuated in the way they think of themselves. So the work that I'm about to show you today is about decompartmentalizing, freeing yourself, unleashing your creativity, decommodifying how you think of your own energy, your own ability, your own time, and liberate yourself to just become a creative free agent in the world. So using placemaking as a means for activating people into participatory cultures, and therefore, being able to attain patterns of justice and equity, we use placemaking. Because after all, in colonialism, you're just talking about space that is seen as a commodity, where there are so few places where time and space is not for sale. So as villagers, sort of, I like to think of what I'm doing is trying to reawaken people's inherent proclivity for village and place and connection and love and community. So yeah, to help people to kind of reawaken to that inherent capacity. And we also use permaculture, but applied in the urban setting, so it magnifies the impact of everything you do. Everything's an educational opportunity, especially if it's located in public space strategically, then it has a chance to impact people's way of seeing themselves and the world and the people that they live among. So what we do is intentionally stack these functions, and I'm going to read you some of them right now. Thought about this a bit today in a different way for this presentation. So the stacked outcomes that we seek, that we get in every project I'm about to show you, is that first of all, they have to be accessible and participatory. We grow grassroots leadership every single time. We unmake isolation and we create gathering places in every single circumstance. Everything's an opportunity for growing people. Frankly, the whole thing is a social consciousness project. Even if the physical infrastructure seems to be what we're making, it's actually a way of reconnecting people and empowering them. Of course, we are mentoring children as much as we possibly can with every project. Political bureaucratic transformation is an outcome of all of this. Come to Portland and I will tour you around and show you what I mean by that and introduce you to some of the transformed political and bureaucratic cultures. Ecological modeling, social, physical, ecological systems, of course, localizing everything in terms of energy, food, and transportation. Urban agriculture being a really key kind of medium for engaging and transforming systems. Re-engage people all over the place. Yeah, as I said, mentored kids, reversing health indicators. Everything becomes an opportunity to model an appropriate and effective climate response. Broadening and activating the spectrum of capital, so you don't just need money, but if you've got friendship, everything is possible. And upending just the whole culture and mindset of commodification through creative re-engagement. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to show you pictures, and we'll get as far as we possibly can in the time that we have. Okay, I'm going to start at the beginning. Okay, so please give me like a 5-minute time check. Here we go. We're going to start small and get enormous. So this is one of the first interventions we did in public space back in the mid-90s, and I know people are really familiar with these Little Free Libraries, but before they were called Little Free Libraries, that was really a movement that was founded on what we were doing in Portland. Little Free Libraries started in 2009, and we started these interventions as a kind of whole fleet of what we called 24-hour book stations back in the mid-90s. And we're really happy when the Little Free Library folks came along and decided to run with these prototypes. So it's just exciting because they were always designed to be replicated. But all the stuff I just listed as intentional outcomes are embodied even at the smallest scale. For instance, we have engaged kids to go out and gather stuff from demolition sites all around them as gentrification is playing out. Gotten these kids involved, and they built this little free library sort of prototype out in public space, which was illegal. We all got in trouble, and the law was rapidly changed because what we're doing is actually it's actually anticipated in all kinds of goals and objectives called benchmarks that every city and town actually has established, including to mentor kids and get kids involved in changing public spaces to lower, crime and address, traffic and stuff like that. So this is this huge thing that is not just functional but symbolic and easily replicated. So replicability, the fact that it's modeling ecological design through the repurposing of materials, engaging children, challenging dominator patterns that tell us that we can't create in public space, or we just simply assert it directly. And that's your radical cultivation right there, that people are like, wait, this is absurd. The idea that I have no voice in the community where I live and I work so hard to pay rent or a mortgage all the time, and there's no voice in between the space between our homes. It would be helpful if you read something about the history of villages, because then you would be so offended by the idea that you're powerless in your neighborhood that you would just take off the collar, of your own kind of, voluntary complicity, and throw it aside and say, no, I've awoken, been reclaimed my sense of my agency as a villager, and all these people around me think they are conservatives, think they are liberals. We're all deluded and convinced to be preoccupied with polarizing issues. I will get outside and I will engage children who sit there neglected or, stuck on technological distractions, and get them outside and use their bodies and teach them how to use tools. Anyway, that's exactly how I felt when we built this little library. I just come back from all these travels, visiting different wonderful communities, villages around the world, and I was just like, an artifice we live in. Compels us all to think that we're separate from each other and sets us against each other. Anyway, we built this little library. These kids were a big part of the story. Neglected foster kids, with a foster mother always yelling at them, and some friends of mine and I just couldn't stand it anymore. And so we got these kids out, and we knew that the idea that we're powerless in public space, we always have to beg for, somebody to permit what we want to do. We just said, fuck that. We did it anyway. And we stood there and we got in trouble. The police loved it so much. This guy, Ed, the giant policeman, terrifying looking guy, but actually a big softie. He said, you know what? I'm paid to stop stuff which is bad, but I am not paid to stop stuff which is good. So I'm not even going to report this, and transportation's going to have to get mad. And then when they do, call the police. I will stand with you. And that's how good it can be. When they're talking about like, oh, Oregon, it's this, Portland, it's this place of, and what is the most recent term being used to attack us? Portland is a place where the police actually are capable of rocking as well, not just being, lunatic oppressors. That's this whole other cultural thread, which is really alien to our local community. The story has been very different before, and this is part of it. Anyway, let's go on. This is a vision image from the Village Building Convergence of 2015 that just shows the city transformed. And, sometimes you got to have a picture of what you're actually trying to create. Sometimes, we just do it project by project at the permaculture scale, but sometimes you just got to forecast. What are we actually heading toward? This image here, it's showing you what we can actually do now legally all across the city, and that people are actually doing all over the city. Illegally or illegally, they're just doing it. And, and Portland officials are like, oh my God, everybody's kind of doing this one thing. Now we better legalize it, otherwise everyone's a criminal. We just recently legalized pooping in a damn bucket as a primary toilet system. Thanks to Kailash Eco Village, it's now legal for everyone to just simply poop in a damn bucket with a humanure composting system. That makes us sound crazy, but there's all kinds of incredible reasons why that's now become possible. And I expect people to email me at moontrout@gmail.com to find out more about that. Anyway, here's an image of the cityscape, utterly transformed, growing food, nurturing ecologies on all vertical and horizontal surfaces that are appropriate, retrofitting buildings to become passive solar. Streets are filled with people, no longer needing cars because we've localized living and working. And all that's happening at various scales in Portland, Oregon. Of course, all of it's predicated on the idea of the barn raising. So early in our activism, we're like, oh my God, we live in the colonial grid. So we have the fewest outdoor gathering places of all first world nations. Bing, we need gathering places everywhere. And then once we engaged in that, we're like, oh my God, because we don't have place, we don't have stewardship cultures that steward place. So, organizational structures or organismal cultures have been defeated. Third, at a certain point, we realized, wow, because we don't have places and we're not occupying them seasonally, all these cultural rituals that used to be inherent to people are missing as well. Somebody has legislated out of our existence the effect of the barn raising, which used to characterize our lives for millennia, coming together for common cause. Not just seasonally, but all the time, and then falling in love with each other because we've lifted this huge freaking thing or restored or fought against something, Anyway, that led to other revelations, like there's all these social architectures which are supposed to be inherent in the communities all around us, like councils of grandmothers and councils of mothers and fathers, where you don't have to be elected, you just belong, and then you take charge where you are. Yeah, I'm just talking about layers and layers of revelation once you re-engage. So this is your radical cultivation right here. This is seizing your destiny. It's like, oh my God, I'm a villager and I've been deprived of all of this knowing and seeing and all these inherent birthrights that I should have been born within. But instead I live in isolation and we're all set against each other and our parents are constantly in conflict and domestic violence is playing out around us and we don't even know it. If you were awake to all of this, you'd be like, oh my God, there's grandmothers all around me that are just sitting there lonely, needing to impart their stories and their lessons. I need to run out and knock on doors and find them. That's what I do. That's what I do. And I'm not saying I'm awake. It's like a rheostat. The light's a little brighter. Man, if I was really awake, I think I'd just tear off my clothes and run around planting, just throwing seed balls all over the place. So I must still be asleep. Anyway, I know I'm sounding nutty, but I'm just so excited. Here's another thing. A lot of our work is based on design and like talking, collaboration, some deliberative processes, but this is what we also do. Sometimes we just drop everything and we go off into the forest. We do this for the Pickathon Festival, where we just gather stuff from the forest floor and build stages, environments, and nests, and all these different enclosures and piazzas and running fences and sculptures just made out of the forest itself. And we groove. We do it improvisationally. We just take our our weapons of mass construction, you might say, out into the forest, and we just stand stuff up. We make these stages, and musicians come from all over the world to play here, and they're like, oh my God, like this is the wood stage right here you're seeing, and they're just like, I've wanted to play here my whole life. Well, this is so legendary, they think it's existed their whole life, but it's really just been since the mid-90s, and now they're in a space which has been improvisationally created, and then their music just blows up to a whole different scale of exuberance. And I think they're keying off the fact that everybody around them was having fun and not working off of plans and not on, where time and space is commodified. We're all just like singing and dancing and massaging each other and putting sticks together in these wonderful, like, improvisational ways that kind of like are mimicking rhythms of music. Anyway, I'm talking about birthright here. It is everyone's freaking birthright by God to do things improvisationally and not just always be on the clock and thinking that time and space is money, but time and space is freaking joy. Next. This is the design context. Colonialism isolates people and makes them think that they're alone and separate and set against each other. The image in the upper left here shows this. This is like the only bench just for sitting for 360 blocks on Northeast Sandy Boulevard. Like, it's this like miracle that Americans just have a bench in this place to just look at the hedge, which is absurd. But that's what colonialism brings you, because absolute total freaking crazy madmen run the reality as if everything's just a commodity and the rest of us are a human resource. Lizzie Magie invented the game Monopoly as a way of actually helping people understand that they're playing the National Land Ordinance of 1785 if they're in the USA, or they're playing, that's just a blueprint of the law of the Indies that everybody who speaks Spanish in the Southern Hemisphere in Mexico, it's the same game of colonialism. It's the commodification of time, space, and life, and the concentration of power, in the people that then oversee and regulate the rest of us. And in Canada, it's the Dominion Land Survey. They're basically all the same formulation. And the National Land Ordinance, incidentally, is a document that you almost never hear about, but it's the primary document, after which you have the Declaration and the Bill of Rights, the Constitution itself. National Land Ordinance is why Los Angeles is a grid, San Diego is a grid, Seattle is a grid, and almost every town and city is basically laid out on a grid, unless there's some pre-existing native cultures or somehow it's laid out as a later suburban idea. Anyway, going on. It only takes 2 slides to really talk about the design context that we're facing. We're in a colonial expansionist, basically land development. And Noam Chomsky can break it down for you in a more elaborate way, or you can read like James Howard Kunstler in his book, The Geography of Nowhere, to get more about this. Okay, I'm showing you this picture of these 2 women embracing each other, because this is my guiding image. This is what I think of when I think of like the point. I can't think of all of the different permaculture systems at once. I can't keep them all on my desktop. They're all pretty available for me, the strategies, and at the same time, I just need a simple guiding thing that affects me emotionally, and it's this. It's this idea. I think the whole point of what we're aiming at, and for me, world peace, this is when world peace is manifest. When anyone, anywhere can love whoever they love, however they love right now, especially in public space. To me, this is the point of everything that we're fighting for. The epiphany that you might go off and have through some glorious inducement in the forest or the beach, and then you come back into the city. The way that you can sustain that epiphany, to me, is to make love safe for everyone. That's my strategy. That's my guiding light. Also, colonialism reduces nature to a commodity and makes us, would have us be afraid of the world around us. So to re-embrace the other families of the tree of life and make places for them, also within the garden of your own life, is another guiding idea. This is an image that's actually 7 years old. Like, we've literally engendered so many different kinds and types and scales of interventions in Portland, Oregon alone. It's not appropriate to say that we're pounding, but it's like this thing that we're doing relentlessly in waves. 40 communities at once, like design all this stuff and then implement it at once. And then another 40 communities do it all at once. And that's what our nonprofit is involved in doing. We're doing all these one-off things. The design office is always doing things at huge scales, but just like all over the city, intervening everywhere that we can to accelerate the process of change in Portland. And what I'm showing you is only what, the cultures I'm directly involved with are doing. There are so many different nonprofits. Everything's revolutionized in this town. There's almost nothing that is normal. Businesses are doing, like, among their primary objectives is building community, not just like serving or making something, but it's how they bring people together to do what they do, or the spaces that they make where people come in to enjoy what is being created. I'm going to show you a really quick strategy for intervening that you can apply in your own neighborhood, speaking of waves of transformation. So these six elements that I'm showing you: form or boundary, center or village heart, gateways, transforming streets into pathways or journeys, nodes of activity, and then monuments or places of story and memory. All of these kinds of things actually do exist, but not networked as a place, not seen as a whole, usually in the American experience. So here's looking at the typical, neighborhood. There is a boundary. You can barely perceive it unless you're along the edge of a waterway. Major roads along which there are main street and commercial areas, and everyone else just kind of lives in the insulae of the gridded neighborhood. So here's a series of interventions. Around the perimeter, we show these green circles. These are where you can actually engender a sense of identity for people that pass through the perimeter of the space on the main pathways every single day, thousands of them. Call out identity there. Claim your identity as a neighborhood to say, you're arriving home or come back soon. And I'm talking about flowers, I'm talking about vines, I'm talking about sculpture. Festoon that thing, festoon that location with some serious beauty and engender a sense of identity. This is a radical act that changes consciousness. Those nodes where pathways converge are actually like the major organs of the village. Embellish those with action, activity, conducive spaces. And that's just the major ones. Really, these should be everywhere in the grid. I think within a minute of where anyone lives, there needs to be a roads where people can find each other. In this neighborhood, I'm actually sitting in this neighborhood right now. These are all of these things that are happening in the neighborhood that most people don't see as being in relationship to each other. So I'm just mapping them out here and then connecting them with the way that we actually travel between these nodes in the grid. Make these, like, actually embellish these pathways, and you can do it with like little painted paw prints using house paint. You can do it with, cues hanging from the trees around you. Whatever you might do, like embellish those as walking pathways, just to help people see that the whole landscape has a coherence. Then there's all these things that have happened that are in the form of stories, whether they're things that, or something special was done, or something was opposed, or something actually exists in the way of art or a heritage tree or something. Call them out and then start to create strategic interventions that are actually special stories. Okay, I'm talking about revillaging. I'm talking about going from seeing yourself as separate and you just live in this neighborhood which is named after some guy who developed it for profit, and to instead like go, oh my God, we're all villagers and we're ultimately all on the same side. There needs to be a village heart. There needs to be all these nodes of activity where people come together and create with each other to restart our collaborative nature and intervene everywhere to start creating a coherent whole. Okay, so here's some manifestations. Stuff like this, where an American, a Portlander in this case, just says, I can't stand it anymore. There's not a single public square in my neighborhood. I just read that Americans have the lowest number of community gathering places of all first world nations because we freaking live in developments and we have to fly across the ocean to actually visit a village. So let's stand our ground. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give up my whole damn front yard and turn it into a facility like this. This is Malka Hoffman, who some of you know. Seth and I were just talking about Malka. She came up to help restore this project as part of her internship. And she's sitting across from this mermaid, a little girl who used to live across the street. This is her dream. This man who owns this yard came across the street to ask her what she would like to see happen in the world. He had just read an article where it was being pointed out that, you know, the majority of the dystopic patterns around us are established by mostly by white men between 35 and like 80 in this world. And he just was disgusted. He walked across the street to this little girl and he said, what do you want to see in the world? Because whatever you want to see, we can create in my front yard. And she's like, well, I would love to have a place to gather where people can talk to each other. Amazing, sort of little hardwired villager talking there. And he's like, okay, tell me more, tell me more. Well, it would look like a wave with a lighthouse. More, tell me more. Well, it would have a big sister. It would have, I've always wanted to have a big sister and she would be a mermaid. And that was enough. So they created it. Here's Malka, who's a bit of a mermaid herself, sitting across from this mermaid that she helped to restore. You can see that there's a void behind the back of the mermaid because the little girl wanted to be able to hug her big sister. And I could just go on and it would make me cry. So I'm not going to say any more. But the idea of going to your edge, your private edge, and inviting people across the line and making a conducive public space is radical cultivation. You're like, I refuse to submit to the compartmentalization of the world. Private space and public space is part of one world, you know? There's a bunch of permaculture. One of the things that we do in our design practices, we're like, oh my God, up till now, only rich people can afford architecture and planning services. So all of our students are now like at the service of people everywhere in the city, especially homeless people. So here we are working with working class people to re-village a whole block. And everyone gets a permaculture master plan that kind of fits their world together with everyone who's around them. And we've actually built a whole model of the block. And these are some of the interventions that are actually manifesting change on the block. Like, of course, mowing down fences and putting pathways and gates, you know, community saunas, micro housing. And you can just see that we're starting to create a program here of healing spaces, hot tubs, play spaces, tool libraries, altars, community meeting houses. So many people think that their activism has to go away from them. They have to go elsewhere to fight. Okay, there's truth to that. But if it takes you entirely away from your village so that you're not actually directly creating your village every day through your art and your music and your love and your ability to make food and convene people and help them feel wonderful, then you're being distracted too much from your essential life purpose and also your most acute aesthetic experience of being alive. Here's Adriana. She's one of my best friends. She's a naturopath in the neighborhood who just closed her whole shop because she had so many friends from doing all the community building work I'm showing you that she like retrofits her house to make a naturopathic clinic in her front living room. And then she creates this waiting room bathroom out front using straw, clay, and cob and stuff to wrap the front porch. And she adds this straw bale living room off the back. Across the street from her is a zero carbon nursery school where people come from just within walking or biking distance. So there's no carbon footprint for bringing your children to the nursery school, the Hummingbird School. It's on the block where I'm sitting. I am sitting in an edible world all around me, surrounded by friends in every direction, with all these pathways that connect me through the interior of the block. And just a few feet from me is this building, the Planet Repair Institute, which is an embedded urban permaculture school where we illegally transformed the house into a straw clay demonstration project wrapped with cob. Then we reported ourselves, and the city was like, so freaking awesome, we'll legalize that. And while we're legalizing it, We'll also create the Alternative Technology Advisory Committee and put permaculturists in charge, natural builders in charge of legalizing alternative technologies. You should hear about that in the news. Besides just, federal police coming to try to crack our heads. They're trying to crack our heads because we're doing the coolest stuff in the world. Okay, all this micro housing all over the city, and some of it's on this block. People have been doing this stuff, like the first load-bearing straw bale, the first timber frame straw clay, super hybrid natural building in the lower right there with compressed straw and double cob walls. And anyway, all this stuff wasn't even legal to create, and people were just doing it. And when it came time to actually legalize straw clay, the city government said to us, we need to see the prototypes that have been created. We don't need to know where they are. We just need anecdotal evidence and stuff, and whatever testing data you can find. So I said, wait, you're saying we had to do this on our own authority first? We had to break the law first? And they're like, yes, but don't say that. So I'm saying it to all of you. Okay, this block is revegetated and food forested, and I just love perennial vegetable gardens. Oh man, there's so many things you can grow that are self-starting and regenerative, cyclical. Here's this chicken palace just a few feet away from me up the hill here. It's in the form of an egg. That's how chickens would have it when they're thinking about place. Recycled plexiglass chicken beak shaped front porch roof there you can see, and a weather vane topped with images of people instead of chickens, because that's how chickens would roll, right? These would be chicken patterns. Okay, here's the whole block. Retrofit in the face of climate change, hyper-localized, crime plummets, public health statistics are through the roof, children are being mentored, nobody's lonely anymore. They all have more than enough friends and help. And basically, most of the tech just comes out of their basements and closets where stuff is just sitting there waiting to be activated. So mostly just shared capital, natural capital, human capital. I'm going to sprint through this because I don't even know how much time we have left. Of course, permaculture master plans, homestead by homestead, are a big part of this. But whenever you're working as a permaculturist, always think about how you can link with and benefit the people that are all around you. Don't just think of yourself as an island, but try to see how, like, your outer zones are actually somebody else's inner zones. And that's one of the great revelations of urban permaculture. You're like, oh, wow, when this goes into the city and it actually becomes more equitable, suddenly everybody's zones are overlapping. And those overlaps become incredible opportunities, for all kinds of sharing, but also all kinds of activation and education. Organized community power. Bam! Subvert the colonial grid. Stuff like this has been happening all over the continent for the last couple of decades. Thousands of these things now, literally hundreds of them in our city. But transforming the colonial grid is legal. Everyone can do it as many times in every neighborhood, as many times as they like, for free. And now all the streets that connect the intersections in the grid of Portland are now all available for people to recreate them, to locate, community composting facilities in the streets and plant orchard trees, nut trees, all kinds of edibles, raised planters, interactive features, and literally paint the street, on and on. So when I'm talking about political transformation, leadership, and bureaucratic transformation, I'm talking about how, when you mess with public space, it requires an engagement with all of the so-called vertical scales to then make the interaction more horizontal. While you intervene and you take space in order to create place, by messing with public space, you potentially impact all the scales, even of the nation. This stuff actually became federally funded under this explicit directive of President Obama to start doing this as a means to intervene in gang violence in cities around the country, which of course was defunded after he left. But Transportation Bureau of the entire country, Federal Transportation Administration, actually was impacted and began to allow this to happen all over the country. So the whole reason for doing this is that we're in a freaking empire and the colonial grid is everywhere. And when you intervene in one node in that system, suddenly all the other nodes, all the intersections everywhere start to glow with potential. So establishing this prototype has led to it replicating all over the place. And that was a very intentional thing. And frankly, a very coached thing. It goes back to moments I could describe to you, sitting with the Lakeman Maya and them just like trying to explain how the colonial grid works and how where pathways converge, people are supposed to come together. But in the grid, it defeats the tendency to gather. So this is a vision. Like once you create that node, all this interaction happens, and basically the spirit of the crossroads starts to swirl and just sprinkle everybody with love and magic. People start sharing their dreams and literally creating micro enterprises and becoming more powerful and waking up. This is radical cultivation of yourself and everyone around you as part of a greater whole, where you just like start to come into more and more of your inherent capacity as a villager, as a placemaker, as a change maker. Solar powered 24-hour self-service tea station here on the left. Basically, all the kids in the neighborhood are getting to grow up in a place where they see that people can be powerful, including them. Just took a few people and a bit of advocacy to make it possible to grow food and raise planters with free permits, insured by the city, but authorized by yourself to do it all over the city. Fruit and nut trees, legal to plant in wider grass strips all over the city. Took a few people to advocate for that, couch it in terms of urban agriculture aspirations and food security. Little free kiosk day was declared just a few years ago, and the mayor said, everyone, everywhere, create these things, just install them and you will be permitted automatically. Don't even tell us you did it. You're automatically permitted and insured just by doing it. Just please talk to your neighbors and let them know you're going to do this. It can kind of function. And so liberalizing public space so that people are empowered to create directly where they are is a thing that our ancestors, when I say our, I mean everybody listening to this right now, have been fighting for the longest time, to just directly create and modify their environment. And here you're seeing it and when it starts to happen, it requires the transformation of the political culture for it to happen. Like they start to see, oh, I'm part of the community too. Maybe I should identify with these goals. Maybe the community actually is this vast reservoir of all the ideas that we actually need to open up and release into the world in order to save the freaking reality that we all share. All these things I'm showing you here are just things that are all over the place in Portland. Raised planters to create pollinator habitat out in intersections to slow traffic. What? Involving children. Just on and on. Solar powered cob kiosks, benches everywhere. Yeah. Community posting facilities located in the public right of way, free of permit, accessible, 6,000 miles of residential roadway right now. I could just go on and on. Yards becoming, lawns becoming food, all these pavilions where people can gather. Here's Pedro and Adriana met in this pavilion, and then they made Santiago. So obviously there's a lot of unanticipated outcomes that are beneficial. You should always kind of know are going to happen in permaculture. Yeah, our local paper was called The Bee, so it's got to be located at an appropriate beehive-shaped newspaper dispenser. I think one of the coolest things is when you see a broader spectrum emotional expression playing out in public space. You need irony, you need absurdity, you need gorgeous symbols that will open your heart. Okay, this is applied at a more conventional kind of scale where people are like, oh my God, we live in this town, Duncan, British Columbia. We've not had a public square in all of our history. We need a functional space, and it needs to be an expression of our participation in our local vision. So this is kind of conventional. Participatory design in an iterative process that is based upon the voice of the community, talking about the problems, talking about the opportunities, trying out solutions, basically programmatic pieces, interactive design elements that all kind of add up, and of course nestled into a landscape that's beneficial for all species. 5 different design examples become 3 different options where the pieces are kind of combined into these things that people can kind of review and comment upon until finally one ultimate design that completes the process, and this becomes what they're going to build. And this is a project that we've been working on Vancouver Island in the town of Dunklin. Actually 2 different projects. One is a public square. It's kind of a park, public square, playground. It's a lot of different things at once. you're seeing it. But all these programmatic elements and the essence of the design expression all have come from the community itself, all the metaphors. Also for this street, just a few blocks away, the opioid epidemic is rampant on the island, and on this particular street, there's a lot of violence every evening, sometimes murder, lots of drug dealing, lots of theft and burglaries and stuff. These are just layers of design response. This is where people are talking, contextual analysis, basically using permaculture tools to analyze the urban environment and identify opportunities. And this is kind of like the same approach where it's iterative and you kind of combine ideas ultimately into one final solution. But we're showing here the different layers of revegetating the land and affecting vertical surfaces, things that happen up on rooftops, including solar and ecological systems and micro housing up on rooftops. And then this is what it looks like on the street. I think, Genevieve, you're going to tell me we're short on time now?
Oh, we are about at time. Thank you so much, Mark. This has been such an inspiring conversation. And I've lived in Portland for a while and have seen all of those community libraries on the streets. So it's beautiful to see those ripples out there.
Okay. Well, yeah, the rest of the images would take us to increasingly large scales, including things like actually working on a team to redesign San Francisco into a huge water catchment system to convert the sewer system into a water catchment system in the face of the drought, and to implement all of these kind of already known technologies into one whole. And that was accomplished within a project working with a variety of different partners. But the reason I'm mentioning that is just to say that for you yourself as an activist, you can start with what is most local to you. And the more that you engage and learn and grow, and also grow your relationships, the opportunities that become accessible to you do grow in scale, and the opportunities do grow. And if you just, I would say, is a very spiritual perspective that I have, actually, it's my operative mode, is to let go of outcomes, to not seek gain, and just to be of service. And then all these opportunities keep coming. And if you just keep deflecting them and sharing them, then more and more and more come your way, as part of your own growth toward other scales and other contexts. So I'll just stop.
Wow, thank you so much. That essentially answers the first question that came up, which is how can we personally develop our inner radical cultivation to get out there and be part of the regeneration? And like you were saying, speaking from the inside out and working from the inside out and expanding from there is the most powerful place of leverage to come from. I'm wondering if you would like to add anything to that, or if maybe we should move on to another question.
No, I think it's a great one. And it's actually quite rooted in your first day of permaculture instruction. How do I start? Permaculture basically just says start. Shakespeare also said it too. I don't have the exact quote, but it was to the effect that you just need to feel the urge. I guess Joseph Campbell maybe said it best. Like you will hear this call, and you don't even quite know what it is. But if you keep like hanging up and not taking the call, or not letting yourself be motivated by the call, then something begins to wither. There's a consequence. But like Shakespeare said, it doesn't even matter what direction you start in, just start. And eventually, you find your compass point. And permaculture really does just say start. Just immediately begin to learn, do things that maximize your impact and actually create a return for you, or engender fruitfulness that you can enjoy, which then entices you to do more and to continue. So the point is really just to start. But I want to be specific. I've seen people start by just being like, oh, I can't take it. I gotta get going. I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna bake 1,000 chocolate chip cookies today. I'm gonna sprinkle them out like when everyone's asleep in my neighborhood. I'm gonna put a little plate on everyone's porch with a little note telling where I live. I want to help them. I've seen people, and this is one of my favorite things to do. I do this with my child, my 3-year-old. We go out and we just wrap ribbons around, we dangle ribbons from stop signs and street signs. We hang little poems and pictures on little pieces of string from trees in the wintertime, so they just spin and they sparkle with like reclaimed aluminum foil or something on them. So I'm teaching her about repurposing, but just going out and doing stuff which people are like, and you never tell anyone who did it. So they have to ask other people, like, do you know, hey, I know we never talk or anything, but do you know who did this? It's kind of crazy. There are these beautiful leaves of poetry up and down the street. Who did this? It forces people to talk, and they're like, well, I don't know how I feel about this, except it's beautiful. Like, you haven't broken any laws. You didn't require a permit. Nobody ever thought about poetry hanging from trees, so they didn't create a law to stop you.
Mm.
I think the way to start is to authorize yourself to just create. If you're a design person, for instance, I want to just point out, you're taught to wait for someone else to employ you before you focus your superpowers, your creative superpowers, on a design challenge. If you can see that that is actually a form of like miseducation, you might say, that has made you think you have to be passive and only create when you're paid, throw that off. I would say throw that off and start to initiate. Become an initiator. I swear to you, I know it sounds strange, like, oh, you know, if I don't get paid, then I'll be using my energy and my time without a return. No. Again, to quote Joseph Campbell, like when you do that stuff, the universe just goes, oh my God, that's so awesome. What else do you need? It notices, and then it starts to put opportunities in your path and connect you to people and bring you better life partners and make you a smarter, more, you know, better partner, and like all the benefits start to come your way. So unleash yourself, I would say. It's a great way to start. Just how can you do that?
Thank you so much. That is incredibly inspiring. And it really is. And when we reclaim our agency and realize that we are part of nature, and so our inherent nature is enough just as we are, and that the more that we exercise the muscles of our true nature, they gain momentum and strength. Thank you for that gem.
Beautiful, beautifully said.
So the next question, starting from a young age, what course of study would you add to public education curriculum to help reconnect young people with nature?
Wow. I was just listening last night to people raging in my own community about just the irony of how we're taught to kind of memorialize members of, you know, figures in the patriarchy, and aren't taught, you know, some of the most basic things about relating to other people. Uh, yeah, and I heard other people just kind of chiming in saying, you know, just the most basic things about how legal structures work, uh, you know, how geographic structures work. Um, I would say there's a whole bunch of things that are deferred from our awareness until we become specialists, you know, aimed at occupations that are really simple enough for us to have some familiarity with as children. Like I was mentioning, the impact of zoning. So that's something I work with in my field all the time. And there's people are constantly paying me to help them interact with those systems in a creative design way. You know, like say you want to create an eco village. I'm working with some people from Oakland right now who are looking for kind of their own promised land, and they don't know how to interact with land use, um, you know, systems. And so I'm acquainting them with that. And actually, it's simple enough for everyone to have been able to learn. Like if you were to say, okay, children, go back into your own neighborhood and just notice that where you live is a residential zone, and people don't talk to each other there. And if you go to a commercial zone, notice that you're having to go far away from where you live to where people actually can sit down in a space that's lively and interesting, but that they have to pay to be there. And then you could actually, you know, whether it's showing pictures or taking them literally to examples that where they can experience that some people in this world get to just open a window and hear the vitality of people out in public spaces and look out in this direction, you know, off to the right, and see a market that happens at least once a week, you know, right there in the street where they are. Italians actually have songs I was taught one of them when I was there in the early 90s, something to the effect that, like, if you wake up in the morning and you don't hear people out on the piazza, something's gone wrong again. And that's referring to the occupation of Italian villages by the Nazis. But,
Mm.
it happens over and over again. So it's actually quite an ancient song that someone has stopped you from gathering and utilizing the space between your homes in a way that should bring you together every day. So children can understand a design context to the extent that it helps people be nice, or encourages them to be mean. And they can also understand, communication technologies, things that can help them be emotionally intelligent and more functional. And frankly, people talk about us being in a state of arrested adolescence. It's really because of this disintegration effect, which is hardwired into the design of the modern city as just a perfunctory environment where we're just seen as a workforce.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. I'm hearing this clear thread of connectivity. If the fact that it is the average citizen is so um, un, misinformed about what the land that they stand on is, and how that comes back to that we have forgotten that we are children of the earth, and that we are also stewards in the same time that we are very small and being taken care of by the planet. And that it seems small to know what kind of zone we're in and how that functions, where our watersheds are, what our bioregion is. But those small things that we have lost touch with have huge implications. And then when you speak on the interpersonal level of having these better communication skills between each other, it's that connection and reintegration. So thank you for bringing up that point. That is such a powerful leverage point. And I hope that all young ones can be given those tools for connectivity to people and planet as well.
Can I
Thank
just
you.
say a little bit more about that particular point? Um, so this is what happened for me when I was in the Lacandone rainforest, and we were talking about the colonial grid and stuff. And at a certain point, I was crying, and I was just really sobbing, and I was apologizing. I was talking about European expansionism and stuff. And this person came up to me, and this is what I would do for kids. They need a larger framework to see, like, why is the world the way it is? And this guy comes up to me as I'm crying, and he holds my face in his hands, and I'm sobbing on his fingers, and he's like, "Your people only did this to us because your villages were conquered so long ago. You don't even know who you are," meaning, our people. Like, your people were conquered, your villages were smashed, and then you were conscripted to go forth in the world and extend like this horrific wave of of violence, to go out and attack other, you were turned into a drone to go out and attack other people's villages because your culture was eviscerated. You can teach that to a little kid in some way, like, something's out of order, and we used to live in villages, and now we have to save our money and fly across the ocean to go visit actual genuine human habitat, because living in a development is an artifice. If you can, like, a kid can handle it. My little girl, oh, everybody get ready. She's growing up in a with a sense of the context, but not like with an impulse of anger. She's just like, no, we are all on the same side. Can't stop that.
No, and that is such a good point, that pain begets pain. And while that momentum may be communicative, that we are each of us empowered to do what we can in our own right to stop the patterns that maybe have been causing more pain and begin to repair within ourselves, which allows us to be a part of a greater planetary repair. So thank you so much, Mark. This has been such an incredible download. I really, really appreciate your presence and the work that you do in the world. It's been an absolute honor to have you on the show, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Genevieve. Have a beautiful rest of your day, everyone.
Single sentence that Mark has said has been such a gem. We're so appreciative. You can find more of Mark's work at communitexture.net, cityrepair.org, marklakeman.net, and planetrepair.org. And those should all be listed both in the chat box here as well as on our Symbiosis Symposium event page on the McKenna.Academy website. We are gathering an incredible resource list from all of the speakers who have been a part of this symposium to really further this momentum and continue to give people tools and connection and further modes of research and discovery after this event. So be sure to check out the event page and all the resources there.